329 BC, somewhere east of the Oxus River. The air is thick with heat and dust. In the center of a jeering circle stands a man, or what's left of him. This was Bessus, satrap of Bactria, a man of immense power, cousin to the King of Kings. Now he's barefoot and bleeding on the baked ground. The crowd that once bowed now hisses the word traitor. Watching from horseback is Alexander. His face is a mask of stone. Before Bessus, 2 supple poplar trees have been forced down, their tips bent to the earth and lashed together. They wait under tremendous tension, wooden executioners. Bessus is already a ruin. His ears and nose have been sliced from his head and hang in a bloody pouch around his neck. In moments, the ropes holding the trees will be cut. The trees will snap upright with terrifying force, and they will turn a would-be king into a torn and broken cautionary tale. How did a man who dreamed of ruling an empire end up ripped apart for the world to see? In Alexander's mind, the war for the Persian Empire was over. He had marched his Macedonians across half the known world. Babylon had opened its gates. The treasures of Susa were his. The heart of the empire, Persepolis, had been conquered. All that remained was the final act, to capture the fleeing King of Kings, Darius III, and receive his submission. With Darius captured, Alexander would be the legitimate successor to the Achaemenid throne. Then, the script flipped. News arrived. Darius was dead, and he hadn't fallen in a final battle against the Macedonians. He had been murdered by Bessus, his seemingly loyal satrap. Bessus, in an act of supreme arrogance, then declared himself Artaxerxes V, king of Asia. Suddenly, Alexander's role changed. He was no longer just a foreign conqueror. He was now cast as the avenger, hunting a regicide. This wasn't a choice, it was a political necessity. To the Persians, the murder of a king was the ultimate crime, and their laws for dealing with it were ancient, specific, and terrifyingly clear. To understand Bessus's gamble, you must picture the Persian Empire in 330 BC. It was a sprawling patchwork of cultures, held together by a fragile web of gold and the threat of the imperial army. It was an empire on life support. Its king, Darius III, had already lost 2 catastrophic battles to Alexander. Each defeat was a hemorrhage of authority. With every Macedonian victory, more mercenaries deserted the Persian cause, and the goodwill toward Darius evaporated. Darius galloped east, a king in name but a fugitive in reality. His last hope lay with the fierce horsemen of the far eastern provinces, Bactria and Sogdiana. And the man who commanded them, who rode beside the desperate king, was Bessus. Bessus held all the cards. He was of royal blood, giving him a plausible claim to the throne. His cavalry forces were legendary. He controlled the geography, every pass, every fortress. In theory, if Bessus remained loyal, he and Darius could have bogged Alexander down in a brutal guerrilla war. But when Bessus looked at his king, he no longer saw a divinely appointed ruler. He saw baggage, a liability whose presence endangered them all. The cold arithmetic of power was telling him that the king's life was worth far less than the king's crown. Near the Caspian gates, the royal caravan had dwindled to a pathetic shadow. Supplies were gone, allies had vanished. The king's authority was in tatters. It was in this atmosphere of despair that Bessus made his move. Along with 2 conspirators, he cornered Darius. The king wasn't in his royal tent. He was in a humble wagon, a prisoner of his own protectors. The precise details are lost, but the result was unmistakable. The last Achaemenid king died not by a Macedonian spear, but by the treacherous hands of his own noblemen. Without hesitation, Bessus seized his prize. He draped the sacred purple robe over his own shoulders, and proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, King of Kings. To his followers, he declared that the empire needed stronger leadership. The gamble was on. Bessus was now king, or he was nothing. And the clock was ticking. When Alexander's vanguard finally caught up, they found the king's body lying by a spring, abandoned by all but a loyal dog. Alexander's reaction was one of calculated genius. He dismounted, approached his fallen enemy, and gently covered Darius with his own cloak. He ordered a magnificent royal funeral, and then, in full view of his officers and the local Persians, Alexander wept. Was it genuine grief or brilliant political theater? Likely both. Then, standing over the body, he made a solemn vow. The man who committed this heinous act would be found, and he would pay, not by Greek law, but, as Alexander declared, in the Persian manner. To the Greeks, this might have sounded like rhetoric, but to the Persians, it was the sacred letter of the law. They knew what it meant. A slow, public, excruciating process. First mutilation, then a death so unforgettable that no one would dare contemplate such a crime again. Alexander was promising a spectacle of horror. Bessus likely expected a negotiation. He saw himself as the new power in the East. He expected parley. Alexander gave him a relentless, unforgiving pursuit. The Macedonians, who had already marched thousands of miles, sprinted east as if the war had just begun. They charged over the snow-covered Hindu Kush in winter, a feat thought impossible. They crossed the mighty Oxus River on makeshift rafts of tents stuffed with straw. They survived on a diet of dried fruit and curses, their resolve hardening with every mile. Bessus, in contrast, was running out of ground. City after city, he tried to rally troops, but his authority was built on murder and crumbled under pressure. Nobles slipped away in the night, riding hard to offer their allegiance to Alexander. His allies deserted him one by one. Finally, his options gone, Bessus was cornered in a small fort near Samarkand. His reign was over. One morning, 30 of his own remaining officers, led by Spidamenes, burst into his quarters. They clapped him in heavy golden fetters, a final mocking insult, and rode out to deliver Alexander the one gift he truly desired. The meeting between conqueror and captive was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Alexander greeted Bessus with a chilling, overly courteous calm. There was no shouting, no immediate condemnation. Instead, he posed a single, quiet question. "Why?" he asked. "Did you murder your king, your kinsman, and your friend?" The question hung in the air. It was not an inquiry, it was a judgment. Bessus, stripped of his bravado, could only stammer a pathetic reply about the need for stronger leadership. He tried to frame his treason as necessary statecraft. Alexander didn't bother to answer. He simply turned away, his silence a more damning verdict than any speech. The punishment was already waiting. The order was given with cold clarity. Bessus would be taken to Ecbatana, an ancient Persian capital, to face his judgment. First, public mutilation, as prescribed by ancient law. Then, the trees. Ecbatana's central square is packed. A hush falls over thousands, from nobles in silk to Macedonian soldiers in dented armor. Bessus is shoved into the center of this silent theater. The executioner steps forward. First, the knife. In 2 swift motions, the nose is gone. Then the ears. This is not just about pain, it is about erasure. A man without a nose and ears was a man without honor, a walking specter of shame. The bloody pieces are strung on a cord and hung around his neck. Still bleeding, he is dragged to the city's edge. There, the 2 young poplar trees bow deeply toward each other, groaning under the strain of ropes. They tie his right arm and leg to one tree and his left limbs to the other. For a long moment, there is only the sound of creaking rope and Bessus's ragged breathing. Then an axe swings. The binding rope is sliced in a single stroke. With an explosive crack, the trees whip upright with impossible speed. A horrified gasp rips through the crowd. In that instant, what was once Bessus, satrap of Bactria and self-proclaimed Artaxerxes V, ceases to be a man. His body is torn in two. Alexander never addresses the mob. The spectacle has said everything. Every Persian noble in that square understands the message perfectly. This was not the random cruelty of a foreign conqueror. This was the sacred law of their empire, enforced with absolute fidelity by their new king. By punishing a regicide in the precise manner prescribed by Persian tradition, Alexander claimed a legitimacy more powerful than any coin. He wasn't destroying their world, he was restoring its moral order. He showed them that he, a Macedonian, respected their laws more than one of their own princes had. Greek historians would later write that the sight made battle-hardened veterans sick, seeing it as a descent into barbarism. But the Persians in the crowd saw something else. They bowed low, and for the first time, with genuine reverence, they called Alexander King of Asia. For the Greeks, it was savagery. For the Persians, it was justice. For Alexander, it was a political masterstroke. Bessus was gone, but the wild eastern frontier did not settle down overnight. Other warlords, like the brilliant Spitamenes, who had handed Bessus over, rose up to continue the fight. Alexander would spend 2 more brutal years chasing rebels through unforgiving landscapes. Yet, the image of those 2 poplars lingered. The story of Bessus's end traveled faster than any army, a ghost that haunted the ambitions of every local chieftain. Those who dreamed of betrayal now dreamed twice, and in their second dream, they saw the trees. The message was received. Ambassadors from distant kingdoms began to arrive at Alexander's camp, bearing treaties, not challenges. Even more telling, Darius's own mother and daughters, who were under Alexander's protection, accepted his authority. The man who murdered their king had, by his own gruesome death, sealed Alexander's claim as the rightful heir to the Persian throne. Bessus saw an opportunity to swap a defeated monarch for a vibrant empire under his command. It was a gamble for the highest stakes, but his calculation was fatally flawed. He understood the mechanics of a coup, but he fundamentally misunderstood Alexander. He failed to see that Alexander wasn't just conquering land, he was conquering legitimacy. Instead of founding a new dynasty, Bessus turned himself into a public service announcement, written in gore. His fate became a lesson for the ages. Betray the throne, and you will lose your ears, your nose, and everything held between 2 trees. Alexander didn't invent this cruelty. It was as old as empire itself. He just understood, with chilling clarity, its public relations value. So the next time you hear the story of Bessus, the man supposedly impaled alive, remember the more instructive truth. He was mutilated, publicly shamed, and then torn apart by nature, harnessed for a political purpose. The stake is a simplified legend. The reality of the trees is stone-cold history, and the message it carried helped to cement one of the greatest empires the world has ever known.